Welcome to Here is Where We Meet, an original podcast series produced by Tank.
I'm Michael Morris.
And I'm James Lingwood, and you're listening to Here is Where We Meet, a series of conversations with just a few of the artists we worked with across 3 decades as co-directors of Artangel, producing extraordinary art in particular places across London, the UK, and beyond.
Today, we're joined by an interdisciplinary pioneer, the artist, musician, writer and filmmaker Laurie Anderson. Laurie has a long-standing history of collaboration with Artangel, dating back to Self-Storage, made with Brian Eno in 1995, as well as the inaugural long-player conversation with Doris Lessing a decade later in 2005. I remember some years ago, in the mid-1990s, spending sort of a good part of 3 years talking to you and Brian Eno about a collaborative project. We didn't really know what it was going to be. We sort of talked about storage for songs and eventually found a storage depot in Wembley Industrial Estate, which Brian decided he wanted to make a number of multimedia installations behind the closed doors of the empty storage units, some of which were as big as a tennis court and some of which were as small as a cupboard. And I think your role, if I remember rightly, was to create storage stories which took you from one unit to another, down the corridors.
What were some of the pieces that you remember in that show?
I remember the Vizier of Memphis, which was a mummy we borrowed from the British Museum storage. And the Vizier of Memphis was an enormous mummy, completely wedged into a tiny little wardrobe. So you open this wardrobe and there's this mummy staring at you.
That is so dreamlike.
Yeah. I mean, I remember you and Brian visiting together, and we looked for a number of spaces, as we always did with Artangel, and knowing that this was the right place, because it was just so unlikely. It was in the foothills of Wembley Stadium. But nobody ever goes to Wembley Industrial Estate unless they have storage locker there.
It was so genius that Artangel did so many projects. He would never go to that part of town, ever, without the project, right?
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I remember another memorable conversation which you had with Doris Lessing.
Formication, or the sensation of being covered with ants, was the name of that talk.
It might have been.
Yes, it was. It just came to me. That is one of the feelings that I wanted to sort of try to evoke, because I got that kind of from her books as well. I had just come across that word, and I thought it was really a good one. And it was either that or it was going to be, and I forgot what the word is now, but it referred to, I don't know, did you have in the 50s or 60s these kitchen tables that had interlocked boomerang patterns on them, orange and green? That maybe didn't come here, but for Americans, that was a very kind of matrixy kind of memory of staring at this pattern that was in everybody's kitchen in that time, So, and there was a name for that particular pattern of interlocking boomerangs, where you're just sitting there and trying to postpone going to school, like eating your cereal, staring at the boomerangs.
Probably vintage stores have them now. It's sort of like,
I'm sure they do. You can't get rid of plastic. The things that you think are temporary, that were designed to be just temporary, are lasting forever. The things that were supposed to last forever, like democracy, poof. Making America great again is about closing the borders and going back to some ridiculous fictional idea that people have of American life. Basically in the 50s. The nice thing about being in the 50s is the 60s is coming up right away. And we have to be ready for that. I think we have to start thinking about how do you make a community. In that sense, you have to have a counterculture. You have to have something to push against. And we made a counterculture in the 60s that had music, food, health, identity, a purpose, which was to stop a war. That always helps create a community. The communities come out when they're anti-war protests, and then they dissolve into nothing, because it's been overwhelmed by corporate interests. They're not going to let somebody else define a community. They want to define that themselves and sell it back to you.
But I think that the people now, in the face of what's happening, don't feel empowered in the way that people felt empowered to make change in the 60s.
As soon as you do it, it gets monetized. Or somebody tries to take over, and it doesn't have the attitude of that. But
well, I'm just wondering, do you think that for a counterculture to really sort of grow, it needs a real belief in the future?
Not necessarily. You can just believe in the present, too. I don't think that one of the things about the 60s for me was the only people who thought about the future, we felt sorry for them. They had a plan. I'm going to have a certain kind of house. I'm going to have a certain kind of life. I'm going to have a car. I'm going to have all that stuff. We thought they were idiots. We were going to dance down a road that we didn't know where it was going. Because also, there was a huge war going on, and a lot of our friends were being killed in it. That puts you right in the present, death, right away. So all of the things are revolving around climate have death as at its core as well. That's a motivator for a life force. And so I think for me the 60s was very much about the present and drugs and having an experience that you could take you out of yourself. And all of those experiments are going on now, but they're not cohering into something, and I don't know why. I mean, there are many reasons why, I guess.
I think it's to do with online experience being quite fragmented. It's quite hard to actually coalesce online, and so many people spend so much time now in silos online that sort of have their own borders. I mean, for a borderless state like the internet, there are still so many borders and boundaries.
Yeah. A very good answer to this question is that people are not doing that because they're online nonstop. And then trying to have a life, make a life out of that, which is, it's like an ad for a life, not a life.
Yeah, I mean, something we thought was going to create freedom and liberty is now turned out to be about control.
It's always like that. I think, so it starts out like that one way, and then pretty soon somebody goes, there needs to be someone in charge here.
I mean, you say that, there's a sort of complete, which you could say is quite a cynical stance, but there's nothing cynical about your work. Your work doesn't have cynicism in it, I don't think.
That's disappointing for me to hear.
It has irony.
Oh, okay.
I don't think it's cynical. Do you?
Cynical, no, it's not. It's kind of cheesy to be cynical.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember what I was going to say about starting a movement and not feeling qualified to do that. I was complaining to a manager that I had in the 80s. I was saying, there's just no avant-garde anymore. It's so corporate. It's so, none of that kind of freedom of that kind of like art movement. She said, why don't you go to a cafe and sit down there for a while and just start one? I was like, oh my God, give a reason why not. So I did that in my own ways in various things. It never really took off, I have to say. But, I think it shouldn't stop you from starting your own movement to just kind of go, sure, I could just start here and now to do that. It does take more than yourself, so you'd call up a couple of like-minded people and start something.
What would you say to the like-minded people about the movement that you want to start?
You'd say, I want to start a movement. Do you? What should we move? There's a lot of stuff to move about. I mean, there's an endless number of things to be interested in. Also, a movement that celebrates something that isn't against anything, but that celebrates some beautiful aspect of the world and people. I mean, like many art movements. Oh, suddenly they discovered the edge. Isn't that exciting, Or when we were doing minimal stuff when it was the early 70s, it was all about the edge. There were magazines about the edge. There There was endless seminars about the edge. Representational stuff was not interesting. It was just the edge of, so it was Donald Judge and all the minimalist painters, and it was fascinating. But what did it look like? It looked like kind of a construction site. You'd go in and you'd see a piece of sheetrock leaning against a wall. That's my artwork. Indistinguishable from a construction site, but you could write about it and talk about it forever when you're talking about what is the edge between art and construction. There isn't one, it's the same. So I think that's
this
the
idea
difference.
of just starting a movement, because I kind of get that feeling with quite a lot of work that you make, that you start something and then you, as it were, take the ideas and the words for a walk and you see.
That's a nice image, yeah. Yeah, see what happens if they have legs, yeah. Sometimes they don't, and they're just like, ugh. It would be nice if there were groups that just wanted to, just about beauty, something, that was not about collapse. Myself, I'm like a very dark person as far as I'm attracted to collapse and disaster. You wanted to start with this idea of the Hurricane Sandy collapse, which was a something that I wrote for Kronos Quartet about Hurricane Sandy, which hit New York in 2012, and was initially, we were ready for this hurricane. It was like it was going to be a show. We had gotten a lot of food and drinks there. We had the lights on. We had the TV on. We were like, this is going to be a spectacle. It was like a spectacle sport. We saw it coming over New Jersey in a giant cloud. And then it arrived and it moved across the park in the form of rain and then in the form of water, not just rain. So the Hudson covered the park. Hudson River covered the park, and then it covered our street. Our street was a river. And so then we realized, and then the lights went out, and then it stopped being a fun evening at that point when actually it's maybe just started being a fun evening because we ran down to the street. Water was pouring into our place, and the place across the street had already been flooded, so we went and we stole all of their sandbags. They said, take them, it's too late for us. So it was Lou and me and 4 other people in the building, and we sandbagged our house and saved it. My studio was another story farther down the river, and that was flooded, and I thought, I'll just go and check on the damage. When I went and checked on the so-called damage, the entire basement was filled from floor to ceiling with water, and everything that I had in there was floating. And you don't think metal can turn into paper or mush? It can. All of these electronics were kind of pasty mush. Salt water is powerful. So, my first thought when I saw that was like, my life's work has just been erased. It's gone. It's all gone. My second thought, which followed pretty quickly, was, I don't have to clean the basement. And that really made me so happy that I was like, what am I, kind of pack rat am I? I don't care about this stuff, really, not really. And I began to see what a relief it was. And it was a mess, though, I have to say, like draining that stuff. First of all, getting all the water out, and it was all over. The boiler everything had broken. Everything had broken. Water is powerful.
Has it stopped you acquiring and keeping and archiving other things after that?
No. I'm just a natural pack rat.
I think when you wrote this piece for the Kronos Quartet, I think there's a line you says, and I thought, just referring to when you were looking at your flooded basement, you said, I thought how beautiful, how magical, and how catastrophic.
All 3 at once.
Going back to the disaster, catastrophe idea, why do you think, where does that come from, being drawn to disaster?
What point in your life do you get attracted to something like that? And is it important to trace it? And in some ways, I think it is. I connect to catastrophe through one of my grandmothers who was a holy roller missionary to Japan. And she was fascinated by the end times and by fire and by sin and by retribution and all these very dramatic things that would happen and judgment, of course. And so all of these things were mixed into this package. She went to Japan to attempt to convert Buddhists. So shortly after we bombed them into oblivion, she went to some of those cities to go, hello, I'd like to tell you, not in so many words because I'm not going to speak Japanese, but I'm going to sing some songs about Jesus and hope you get the gist of this. It was a complete, utter failure in many ways, but the thing that I took away from what she told me about her missionary days was that she didn't say this herself, but she was a very vain Southern lady who wore very, very elaborate hats, veils, grapes, leaves, very impressive headgear. And the Japanese, while they didn't understand what she was saying, were very impressed by her hat. So she, on her side, was a rose gardener, and she couldn't believe the bonsai cutting style. She said, "Oh, teach me that." So that was the exchange. Rose cutting for hat making. And that's a lot. And she actually made friends that way. When she dropped the whole, let me tell you about Fire Into the World, which they had just seen, thanks to us, she was capable of having a friendship with some of these people that were based on a very, very simple exchange. But that's where part of my apocalyptic sort of interest came. Another one was the Cuban Missile Crisis as a 12-year-old. The closest the world has come to thermonuclear war. And I was just looking that up. It was 13 days long. And I remember that 13 days so vividly. And
Were you
remember,
making preparations with your family?
we didn't really know what to do, but I remember looking in the mirror thinking, I'm only 12 and I'm going to die. That's like, and then I thought, and everyone's going to die. And then there was a closet we had in the front hallway, and it was one of those things with mirrors on both doors. And so I went to hide in the closet sometimes because I really thought, where we're going to go? There's nowhere to go. We didn't have bomb shelters. So I would open these doors and see the endless reflections of myself into infinity on both sides. And that was a strange kind of comfort.
And presumably you're getting your information from direct radio broadcasts.
Yeah.
The president speaking to the nation.
And TV.
And TV.
Yeah.
But there wouldn't have been the same sort of babble of commentary and different points of view. And
we had two commentators then, I think, only, as opposed to an industry dedicated to commentary.
But they were the voice of authority.
Yes, they were.
You trusted and believed.
Yeah. And they were scared too. They were very scared.
You could tell that from...
Oh, yeah, they petrified, not just a little bit nervous. This is, as in, this is it sort of like thing. So that left a mark in terms of that. And so I always have an ear out for that kind of fear. And it's a real thing. I also notice that in people mostly in their 20s. I see that fear. And I haven't seen that fear in a while. And I saw it mostly recently in some choreography that was being done, young dancers who were making some dances based on Phil Glass's music. Phil Glass's music to me is ecstasy and spirals and meditation and, repetition with small variations. It's not, I'm going to throw up and rip my soul out and chop my head off, which were these young choreographers that was what they were saying with their bodies. And I was like, what is this? And a friend who was there with me said, my daughters who are that age don't think they're going to live to be old people. I said, really? Do they really think that? Or is that just something they say? Or is it, he said, they're not going to have children. and they don't think they'll live long. I was like, are you kidding me? And he said, no, I'm sorry to say, that's what they and their friends are telling me how they feel about the world.
It's curious that the music that of Phil Glass can inspire that degree of anxiety, but it's not just the music; it's the fear that's already there,
Of course, yeah.
which is reinterpreting the music as being the soundtrack of
It has
anxiety.
the spiral that fear can sometimes be in, and just
But I
constantly.
doubt that was the feeling that
reinforce himself.
Phil made the music with originally.
I don't hear that. I don't hear fear and anxiety in Phil's music. I hear propulsion. Now, if you go to Koyaanisqatsi, that's another thing. Buildings are crumbling, and you see the apocalypse, and you see how everything can break. He's not an idiot who's just making spiraling patterns of, hopefulness.
No, but Koyaanisqatsi, the soundtrack was made to accompany those kinds of images.
Those images,
They
yeah.
were responses to those images, I imagine.
Presumably.
I don't know.
Although I think that when Godfrey and Phil collaborate, it's very much like when Bob Wilson and Phil collaborate. They never talk about it for 1 second, and they put it together on a stage. And it seems to somehow work and talk to each other. And I love that idea of collaboration, because otherwise it's illustration. And this is really pushing against each other in a really, really nice way. They're great collaborators.
In your work, which is an integration of sound and image and language, can you say what comes first for you? Is it language that comes first before sound or image, or doesn't it work like that?
No, it works all different ways. I don't have it. I'll take whatever I can get. Sometimes I'll just hear a phrase. What's the skimpy balconies? I just heard that phrase, and I was like, I need to write a song that has that feeling in it of what a skimpy balcony, all the things that suddenly radiate out from that. And it also reminds me too of like one of the fascinating things I find about vision is that when you look at something and not look carefully, but you're looking at something to navigate through your day, that 90%, or 93, I think they said 93% of the activity in your mind is memory, and the rest is basically optic signals. So you're looking at things that you remember. So what then, if you see a green field, you go, oh yeah, tick off green field, and all the green fields that you've ever seen are there. So back to the first green field, how did you perceive that? I mean, what was that green field? What did you make of it, and how? It reinforces for me the dreamlike way we live our lives, not really seeing things, but remembering them and filling in the blanks.
Well, you seem to somehow retain the sense of wonder of seeing a green field.
I would say bafflement more than wonder, just like trying to see what I'm thinking as I see it also. But my training as a Buddhist is the same as my training as an artist. It's exactly the same thing, to be aware. That's the only thing. There are no rules. It's a breathtaking, I don't know what to call it. It's not a thought structure or a religion, or it's just a way of being, is to try to be in the present, to recognize where you are at the moment and not be comparing it and contrasting it and remembering it. And so that is something I can always go back to in feelings of panic or sadness. Is that training, which is always just stop interpreting everything and just be in the moment. That's why I love Ram Dass. And the be here now sort of idea is very helpful to me personally. Be able to not kill myself out of despair, which I could, as a very dark person, easily do, in some ways. Oh, that was the other thing that Mingyur Rinpoche said that people had a hard time with. He said, everything in the world is love, and even suicide is love, because it's the attempt to be free. And I think to me as a person, that is what I try to be more than anything, not to know anything, but just to be free. So that kind of teaching is really valuable to me.
How did you gravitate towards Buddhism? How did that become?
I've thought about that many times, and it really was a mental thing rather than an emotional thing. And it was because a friend of mine, he was kind of feeling very, very scattered. He just couldn't see what. It was just a bunch of stuff rattling around, and he went to this place in Western Massachusetts, Vipassana, which is a fairly new form of Buddhism, about 500 years old, coming from Thailand, and it's based on other kinds of, emphasizes other things than other types like Theravada or Zen. So it has a very physical body-based approach. And at that time, when all of these Americans coming back from India in the 60s, they came back and they just wanted to make a place where you could do what they did in India, which is like go into the stratosphere, mentally, emotionally. They're like, they came back with their minds blown and wanted to do something. So they made this place in Western Massachusetts, and it's still a big center for people. Jack Cornfield, Sharon Salzberg, many of the big teachers are still around there, coming from that era. So he, my friend, went there, and it was super hardcore then. It was 10 days, 18 hours a day of meditation. So you got up at 4. You meditated for 3 hours. You had a little tea. You meditated for 2 more hours. You walked. Then you meditated for 2. Then you had the only meal of the day in the middle of the day. And then you meditated for 4 more hours. You had tea and maybe a cracker, and so on. And so at the end of that 10 days, he said his mind was like a beam, and he could focus. The chatter had stopped. He could move it here, he could move it there, and it would be in focus. And I thought, oh, that sounds amazing. So I went there, and I showed up, and there was a kind of reception committee, who were checking you in because they didn't want to check in any mental patients who were like, I just want to have my mind blown, or I'm so sad that I'm going to have a mental breakdown the second I sit down. So they're kind of vetting you a little bit and kind of saying, why are you here? And I said, I'm here to get a mind like a beam. And they said, well, this practice is about pain. It's based on pain. And I said, oh, no, I'm here to get a beam. They said, no, you're because of pain. I was like, this is a beam. The beam pain argument went on for a little bit, and they said, I said, I'm going to try it. And so I found out quickly that it is entirely about pain. First of all, you're in excruciating pain, and then it's only gradually that you realize you begin to identify certain emotions with certain parts of your body, because that's the whole point of Vipassana, is the whole thing about when something happens to you and you don't scream at that moment, you put it somewhere, and you put it in your body. So sometimes it's your shoulder, or funny how loss goes really directly to your heart, and you can feel it in there. Jealousy right to your liver, anger right to your jaw, starts locking up. And psychotherapy has a similar approach to the idea of storage, but the retrieval system in that case is language, and you try to talk, the talking cure, that you're going to find it somehow through stories. I don't trust stories enough I can change them around too fast, like most people, like in therapy, everyone's changing their story nonstop. Oh, what happened? Oh, my mother really loved me. Well, no, my mother hated me. I think she loved me, really. You're like, what is your story? Your story is just fluid, So, but your body doesn't lie to you. It is a library of pain, and you have to go and look and find it. And then the idea is try to use your energy to break up those places where it's really, really, really clogged up, and on a physical level. And I trusted that a lot. The other thing I was a sculptor at the time, and so the other thing I was amazed at with this, because you're spending many days and your eyes are very relaxed, and if you even just try to do that a little bit, relax the muscles behind your eyes, all the many complicated muscles that hold your eyes in place, and your eyes gradually relax, and your eyelids relax, and everything behind your eyes relaxes, and then you realize that you're not using your eyes to find things, to be a predator, to kind of look and zoom in on things, but you become much more like the prey who has I was shocked at how much I could see, like 180 degrees around without doing anything with my eyes, because you can see way out here, and part of what happens when your optics go out, you can see with your body. So it was fascinating to see what your body does when you just let it not do anything for a while. It tells you a million things about who you are, where you are. Also, because what's behind you becomes just as important as what's in front of you. So I've done that since 1977 in a fairly consistent way, really. There may be a year where I don't go on one of these things, but I usually go and do this just because I always get something from it.
Has it ever let you down?
It's not a me to let down, because you don't have a sense of achievement in this. In fact, the training is about, like, what did you want? And so that's just as valuable when you don't get it as when you do. Because you're not trying to get something, you're just trying to observe how this works. What did you want? Why did you want it? And that's another thing that I appreciate about it so much, is that when you, let's say, fail or something terrible happens to you, those are just as good as the things that are wonderful things that happen to you, just as valuable, just as real, just as much to be enjoyed as anything else, and it's not about improving yourself. The other thing was that kind of blew my mind. At the end of this, they said, okay, now you're all, the retreat is over, now you're all going to go home. Some of you won't be meditating for 18 hours a day. And I said, no, we will. And they said, some of you will only do like 8 hours a day. And like, oh, no, no, we're in. Some of you will just do an hour. Some of you do 15 minutes, and some of you won't do any at all. And here's the thing, though. You won't forget. And the next time you do it, you'll maybe get a little farther. And then guess what? You'll forget again. And that's when I was in. I knew that was when I was in. I was like, finally, somebody who understands the dynamics of how you do something like that. You do it, then you forget about it. I thought, finally, because I was from this tradition of, you better learn this once, and if you backslide, that's even worse than if you never try to do it at all. So judgmental.
Here is Where We Meet is devised by James Lingwood and Michael Morris, co-directors of Artangel from 1991 to 2023. The theme is composed by PJ Harvey. Millie Roberts is the production manager, and Matteo Pini is the editor. Nell Whitaker, Sorab Golsorki-Ainsley, and Thomas Ruche are executive producers. Otomi Larcher is the graphic designer, and Stephen Lewin is the audio engineer. Here is Where We Meet is an original podcast by Tank and is available on all good podcast platforms. The series is dedicated to the memory of John Berger, from whose book of imaginary conversations its title is taken.